Are you ready to perform at your highest potential? Welcome to the Performance Matters podcast from GP Strategies, your talent transformation partner. In each episode, we'll interview industry experts and explore best practices and innovative insights to help your organization improve performance. I'm your host, Michael Teal, and today we're talking about data management, and more specifically, the top 5 data management challenges, what they are, and what are some solutions to get in front of them. We've assembled, I would say, a bit of an international panel of experts. From jolly old London, England, I'm pleased to be joined by Lindsay, Pineda, a performance consultant and project management professional with GP Strategies. Lindsay comes to us today with over a decade of strategic analysis and implementation expertise in analytics and consulting. Lindsay, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Excited to be here.
Wait a second. I was expecting an English accent.
It is. Everyone does expect that as soon as they see London or hear London. I am actually originally from Arizona, so I am a U.S. citizen living over here abroad for the last 5 years.
You're not here alone, okay? Our second guest is joining us from Houston, Texas. I'm pleased to welcome GP Strategies performance consultant, Ashlyn Elick. Like Lindsay, Ashlyn joins us today with nearly a decade's worth of project research and implementation expertise across industries, including a very interesting stint with NASA's Behavioral Health and Performance Laboratory. Ashlyn, welcome.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, we're honored to have you both for sure. I can imagine both of you just numbers flying everywhere, like a beautiful mind everywhere. And in formulating this session here, you know, the promise to our listeners is the top 5 data analytics, data management challenges and what you can do about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you, first of all, what the challenge is, and then what can we do about it in terms of from an organizational perspective. So I'm going to start with you, Lindsay, on this one. The first one that you both have mentioned is that organizations often struggle with data paralysis.
So data paralysis, I would say, if you want to kind of akin it to, if you've ever heard the term analysis paralysis.
Yes.
So you have so much information that you just feel paralyzed to be able to make a decision on something. And organizations often feel the same way in terms of data. So the sheer volume of data and the number of systems and how do we collect it? And it makes it nearly impossible to sift through all of it and identify what's valid and what's not. And so often organizations will just not do it. The analysis paralysis related to data is very real and is a very significant challenge that organizations, at least in my experience, have to contend with.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've even heard the phrase, you know, we're swimming in a sea of information, we're drowning in information, but we're thirsty for insight. So my question to you is, you've named the problem. What are some solutions that you would offer to our listeners?
Yeah, one of the solutions that I've seen be effective, and I think Ashlyn can attest to this as well, is consider forming like a data governance steering committee. So essentially a group of people from a bunch of different departments throughout an organization to answer those questions, such as, you know, what data should we be using as an organization or for a particular initiative? How will it be used? Why should we use that? Who should use it? How does it align to the strategic goals for the organization? And having that committee discuss that for every initiative that the organization would like to undertake. So it helps organizations use their data more strategically, which is also really important. And you can often find that this committee is able to bring together departments who actually do very similar things, but aren't communicating with each other about that. It encourages not only communication and collaboration, but also streamlining of certain things. An organization could be collecting data on one thing and another one could be doing the same, and they might be able to join up to be able to do so in a more collaborative way. And it allows people to speak to each other who may not do so on a daily basis, as organizations are often surprisingly siloed.
Yeah, I was going to say that was the word that was coming to my mind, was silo. It almost sounds like you'd be helping an organization hook up the pipes. I mean, from a real crude perspective, and go, hey, you're looking at this, you're doing this. What if we put the peanut butter and chocolate together? Absolutely. And could make something happen, right? So
I had an experience at this institution when I worked with higher education that I visited, where there were 3 separate departments who had never spoken to each other and were all pulling the same information for the same type of report. And it was like, none of them had known that at all. So how do they join up? How do they make sure that they're talking to each other?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really common thing that we see in organizations is how different divisions, different departments, different people are utilizing what ultimately is the same data in either analyzing it in a different way to get the same outcome, or there are just like gaps in their understanding of which departments use data and when.
Okay, so it sounds like this topic number one is really just getting your arms around the struggle with data paralysis. There's so much data out there. That I think feeds in really nicely to your second top five data management issue, and you have that listed as disconnected systems. So, Ashlyn, tell me more about what you're seeing there and why is this a problem?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Elaborating more on Lindsay's point that there's so much analysis paralysis, and one of the primary factors we see in organizations causing that is that data gets pulled from so many different types of systems and none of them speak to one another. So, an example could be like you're getting data from a sales report as part of a sales division, but then you're also pulling client data from a different system. If you have a learning and development system, that's another source of data. And so, there are all these different ways that organizations collect data. And so often they don't collaborate with one another, and divisions can't collaborate with one another on what data is being collected and why. And it causes some real challenges in understanding what's available and understanding how to use it.
Yeah, and I was going to say, being as someone who's been operating in the automotive industry for crazy to say now, like 27 years, I'm feeling what you're saying there. I've seen that from organizations that I'm worked with. So, what are some methods that you would suggest to help streamline data and basically reconnect it?
Absolutely. So, what we typically recommend is centralizing data within organizations into what we're calling a single source of truth. This can be not just an organizational initiative, so thinking like that data steering committee or a particular analytics group that's responsible for how that data is utilized and sourced, but also technically. So, figuring out a way to centralize the data collection and the data retrieval in a way that makes practical sense for organizations and houses all of it in an easily retrieved space for different departments. And the reason this is so important is that decision makers and leaders face so many challenges when trying to understand and analyze what's available and what's reliable. And I think probably in your experience, Michael, you can attest that if you don't have reliable data, if you don't have confidence in it, then you can't really make good decisions as an organization. Providing that single source of truth and centralizing all of that data in one place really increases efficiencies within an organization and also gives leadership and team members the confidence that they aren't analyzing or utilizing unvalidated data in their analysis.
Yeah, you are so efficient as a data expert. You've kind of coalesced two things. So, spoiler alert for our listeners here, disconnected systems and confidence in the data. We're giving you value here and efficiency. Though that's two and three, they're right here, but they're so close together. I'll give you an example from my experience working with training initiatives with organizations, and they want to, boost customer satisfaction or something like that. And if you're just with the learning group, they desperately need that business data, revenue, gross profit per vehicle, what's the impact? And often it's just felt like this, like a holy grail type thing. But what I'm hearing from you is if you can connect these systems, then get to a point of confidence where you can say, hey, I can throw more chips at this learning initiative. Is that kind of what you're going at?
Yeah, that is exactly right. And there's a reason we're talking about those two things right up against one another is that the system and the processes in place are so important in providing that level of confidence that organizations can have within their data. Speaking to your example coming from the automotive industry, I've seen examples in organizations as well where they just have so much learning data available, and it's really important. We want to understand how our colleagues are developing and where their gaps in knowledge are and where they want to grow. But that's also really important for business outcomes because an engaged employee is an employee that's less likely to leave. And so we want to understand how data from one area is inferential or impacting data and business outcomes in another. It helps to have that system in place and have it iterated in a way that's replicable by not just a singular team member, but in multiple areas of the business. And then also understanding how those requirements impact those business outcomes that organizations might be interested in learning more about or having access to.
I want to add to that. Yeah, no, there's 2 points here that Ashlyn made that I just want to kind of make sure are also highlighted. So one of them, she mentioned the single team member working in industries such as automotive or aerospace or those kinds of things. Anything that has to do with manufacturing or anything that has to do with something that has employees that might have been with them for 27 years, 30 years. Those employees are a wealth of knowledge, and there's nothing to take that away. That is absolutely imperative that organizations have that. However, it is very often that organizations don't have a place where the stuff in someone's head is now someplace else. And back in the day, it used to be 3-ring binders, where you flip through training manuals and that kind of thing. And some organizations do still use that. But it's really important that those fountains of knowledge in the employees that you have are also able to be shared in a systematic way for everyone within the organization that will touch that, can use in that way. So having a centralized place or a way to capture that knowledge is really important. And the other thing is that Ashlyn touched on learner data and also with business data, things like demand and capacity. That may not necessarily be related to learner data specifically, but that is business data. So like data in general. So what's the demand for somebody's time? What's the capacity that they're able to work at? That type of thing is all information. So there is a lot of information that organizations generate, learning data, business data, financial data, and all of those tell a story. And that's what having this information in a centralized place allows somebody to start to get to.
Yeah, that's a fascinating concept there, that your data tells a story. And I'm sure you two can attest to that in your daily roles. When it comes to this concept of the disconnected systems and the confidence in data, points 2 and 3 are challenges. Ashlyn, what could be done to make sure organizations are collecting the right data? I think that's kind of what you're referring to, Lindsay, is making sure that we're capturing the right thing so we can tell the right story or examine and find out what that story is.
This is, I think, what really excites me about data analysis. It can be so overwhelming, and I think we've touched on this, that it's just that analysis paralysis. It can be so overwhelming for organizations and for leaders and team members with all the data they have and all these different systems. Even if they get to a place where it's collated together, how do they best utilize it? And I think what we tend to recommend is taking an iterative approach. These are all steps in the process to begin to build out an organization's data capabilities. And if leaders can establish that steering committee, if they can centralize these systems, then they can develop a process for collecting requirements and understanding what fields of data they have available and how they are utilized. And then also being able to prioritize which pieces of information are most critical to their business outcomes, because then they can also identify gaps. And ultimately through that, it means that there's a more structured approach to their process of collection and analysis to be able to utilize those things to make better decisions.
I think that kind of leads us to number 4 on your list here. And Lindsay, I'm going to throw this one over to you. I know that you said the 4th challenge you're seeing is standardized data definitions and ownership. Tell us about this. Why is this such a challenge?
Yeah, I mentioned in the last challenge that we were discussing this concept of demand and capacity, right? So capacity could mean something different to one department than another. So capacity to one department might mean the actual human hours available, whereas another department, it might mean the number of actual people that are available. And not having that joined up definition doesn't allow for, as Ashlyn mentioned, kind of more standardized policies, procedures, reporting standards, those kinds of things that are shared across an organization. So you'll have the departments that have their understandings of what capacity or a certain term might mean, but they may not be shared across the organization. And therefore, when reporting is pulled, it could mean something different depending on who's looking at it, even though it might be trying to be used for the same purpose, essentially. So multiple departments collect data, but they don't always have shared definitions. And on top of that, multiple departments collect data and they don't often own the data itself. So there's no clear gatekeeper for shared data across the organization, which then makes it challenging to determine who should have access, why should this person have access. And all of that lack of clarity really leads to a lot of confusion about who's ultimately the owner, who's ultimately deciding what data is collected, how is it used, for what purpose, what does it mean when I'm looking at this report? So having that challenge relating to the data definitions or ownership, that's definitely prevalent.
I've observed your problem many times within organizations over the past, couple decades here. So, in terms of solutions though, Lindsay, I mean, that's what we're kind of talking about. You name standard data definitions, ownership as something that I'm sure we're all feeling. What would be some potential ways businesses can solutionize on this?
So one of the ways that, Ashlyn and I have talked about in terms of suggestions to an organization is creating kind of a data dictionary. So a shared definition of terms across the organization. Now, that may not apply to every department because there might need to be a difference in what capacity means, but it's having a shared understanding of that across the organization. And that is actually something that the Data Governance Steering Committee can do, is start helping to develop a data dictionary, establishing clear ownership for which parts of the data are necessary. So if you're working in, the manufacturing part of an automotive industry, who owns that data and what's the definition of what they need to do and how is that shared across the organization? Is capacity the same for everybody? But having that understanding at least gives a good overview to be able to then do those more standardized policies, procedures, reporting, including things like what kind of data will be collected, who gathers it, what's its intended use from the outset of any initiative. And it also helps future-proof organizations. So it helps streamline processes and ensure continuity, and that information is not just with one person or mind of someone else. It's shared across so that everybody kind of understands how this data thing works within this organization.
Yeah, that would be a dream, wouldn't it? Versus there's 19 little hidden cupboards and there's somebody with tribal knowledge that has it, and they're on vacation, and wow, who's going to make a report or a dashboard to help me find this? It sounds like that's kind of one of the things that you two help organizations do in terms of bring some order to the chaos. Fair to say?
We certainly try, don't we?
That's the hope. And I think Lindsay's point is so pertinent, because something that I think we both see a lot in organizations that lack clear ownership of different types of data and different sources of data, they also tend to lack cohesion in how that data is analyzed, even if it's meant for the same thing. I think organizations really struggle in some instances, or teams really struggle, I guess is a better way to say it, where they're trying to get to the same place, but they've used different methods to get there. And so their numbers don't match and they don't know why. Being able to have a gatekeeper, to have an owner, to have someone who's responsible for a particular type of data or a particular data outcome in an organization can really mitigate that risk for leaders and for team members.
Absolutely. I know we have a fifth data management challenge here, and Lindsay, I'm gonna have you wrap us up with this one. Final challenge was, you mentioned it's data gap. So tell us what you mean by that.
So ultimately, what most organizations want to do is take insights into action. So data insights, make them actionable, and really be able to tell a story, and usually to upper management. They want to be able to tell a story to their leadership about why they might need more personnel, or about why they need to buy this machine, or that type of thing. And using data-driven insights is a really effective way of doing so, because it's difficult to argue with data. This is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm seeing. This is kind of how I'm seeing it happen. We have an influx of people that go on holiday or go on leave during the summertime. Do we need to bring in temporary staff? Do we need to do, how do we do this? But it's ultimately telling a story. And it's really difficult to do that if you don't have all the data, or you don't even know where your data gaps are. It's really common for an organization to start looking at data after an initiative that they've started is well underway. They're not even sure what kind of data they're actually producing from said initiative, or what the success factors actually look like in terms of data. The time to look at data is at the onset, is even before. you start the initiative. What is going to be measured? What does success look like? Do we already have data available and accessible? And if not, how do we do that? How do we collect it? What do we actually need? And do we already have that or not, essentially? Organizations, need to understand what is currently possible, what they want to be possible, and where are the gaps in between to figure out how to bridge that for the initiative's success.
That sounds to me like you're helping them create a map or something like that. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so data mapping, it can be looked at in both in organizational and technical activity, essentially. There's the literal mapping of data, which is the data itself. What points are captured? Where are they stored? Which systems? And then there's more of an organizational aspect of mapping the activity. And that one is, how will this be measured? What does it mean to be successful? From what will the numbers tell us, essentially? And what will we do with that information on a strategic level? And some of the ways that this can be done are, a strategic discovery session, at the start of an initiative. So all of the relevant departments are in a collaborative mapping activity to outline how it will be measured. What does success look like? What data do we need? Do we have that? So involving everyone from the start to be able to determine those things. And that usually helps with full alignment, buy-in, and ownership. And it really helps to begin the story. This is where we are. This is where we want to go. What will we need along the way to be able to tell that story to get there, essentially?
It's the first chapter.
Yeah, that's chapter 1. And it's really cool. I know the name of this podcast is Performance Matters. And I will say, as someone who's now been here for over 4 years, one of the things that really hit me first when I joined GP Strategies, how rigorous we are in terms of focusing on performance versus training or anything like that. It's truly one of the first questions that really struck me as different when I joined is professionals like yourselves talking with an organization and saying, how will we know, what does success look like? Having a true performance consulting group with professionals like yourselves, really, it to me it's exciting just to hear this and listen to this, because it makes me realize when I'm deep in the weeds of something, wow, we've got a fantastic group of professionals really watching the wall for organizations and helping them turn all this data chaos into something that makes sense and can build confidence in growing performance. On behalf of our listeners, I want to thank you both for sharing so generously today with your wisdom and insight. And hopefully I can have you both on again real soon.
The Performance Matters podcast is brought to you by GP Strategies. Together, we can create a world where business excellence makes possibilities achievable. You can subscribe to the show anywhere you get podcasts or listen on our website at gpstrategies.com.